The countdown's on, MP.
Damo, the biggest and best wellness summit ever is fast approaching.
Don't miss out on the entertainment,
The education.
the edutainment that is the Wellness Summit.
Featuring for the very first time at the summit, the Merrymaker sisters, Carla and Emma Pappas, and the 2013 Bachelor himself, the incredible chiropractor and sharp mover, Mr. Tim Robards, plus all of your Wellness Couch favourites. And wait for it, Damo.
All 22 podcasts on the couch will be in attendance at the summit.
Wow, so take your digital Wellness Couch experience and make it a real-life one in the transformational, inspirational, sensational 16 hours of Powerhouse Wellness Summit at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre.
September 10 and 11. More information and tickets available at www.thewellnesssummit.com.
Now, before you go, Damo, there's a big competition on as of now. Every single person who registers before 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, August 14, goes into the draw to win a double pass to the inaugural 2016 Wellness Couch Awards Night.
Amazing. You'll join the who's who of the Wellness Couch as we present for the very first time the best new podcast, most popular episode, most popular host, the best hair, of course, MP, most awkward moment, and many more sensational awards at this night of fun and wellness frivolity.
But you must enrol, folks, by August 14. Tickets at thewellnesssummit.com.
TheWellnessCouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Julie Tenner.
And I'm Bridget Wood. And today we're talking on the theme of boundaries, specifically knowing what your own boundaries are. And I guess this topic came up because I find that concept so interesting, particularly as my first child gets quite demanding. You know, he's that age of 3 where there is that sense that sometimes he really steps into what I feel is asking too much of me. So it's really compelling me then to get clear with myself on what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with, and what's my space and what my level of comfort is on how much he enters that space for me. And I think it can be something that mothers can really grapple with, because sometimes we don't set the boundary almost until it's too late. Like, we're so pushed to the edge that we will then retaliate, and it'll become grounded in conflict, as opposed to an honouring of the self that means that you can see it coming and the need for it coming and preempt that need before it gets to conflict stage, versus it, blowing up. So that's really what I want to kind of unravel in today's podcast, is that idea of how can we know our boundaries? What does it look like to set boundaries, and why they're important for us to honour who we are, and also for our children to see what that looks like.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? It's really interesting. I think boundaries are something that most women in general as a culture struggle with.
Yeah. And
certainly in our course this week, when we're talking about archetypes, and that some of those archetypes call us into owning our boundaries, in that concept of the warrior woman who comes to defend those boundaries. And if she's well integrated, she, defends them, I suppose, with a sense of regalness, or a sense of majesty, maybe is the better word, like a queen.
Yeah, and that she's almost unapologetic in governing those boundaries.
Yes, exactly. Governing is a beautiful word. As opposed to madly going into fight or flight, now I must defend what is mine, because those boundary walls are perhaps crumbling, or there's enemy paths approaching, right?
Yeah.
So I find this really fascinating about the feminine, is that along the way, with our sense of majesty and mystery, has equally gone our strength and deep knowing of what serves us and what doesn't. They almost kind of seem interlinked. And the more you connect with your sense of self and majesty, the more those boundaries are not so they're not so difficult to defend, because they don't need defending. They're simply in place with an acceptance about them, I suppose.
And I think upholding or knowing your boundaries is integral to who you are, and because you stand in the strength of who you are, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And this is also, I find, interesting with anger, particularly when you're talking about, women in general, but anyone that struggles with conflict, anyone that avoids conflict, and certainly in the passive or attachment styles of parenting, boundaries or anger doesn't have a place.
No, and which is really interesting, isn't it? Because that, as we know and as we talk about that, then that sense of repression, that sense of that not being okay, then means it needs an outlet somewhere. And that outlet, can sometimes be things like postnatal depression for a woman because she's so out of touch with her boundaries and her truth and honouring that and her needs.
Yeah, it's true. And that anger then flicks off in these really nasty ways because it's kind of had that, it's like the jack in the box, it's had that lid kind of pressed on it and it's getting wound tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter until it's the straw that broke the camel's back and it flies out in this, can be cataclysmic way that then there's this whole story around guilt and shame and then more repression
and
that
then
follows
it becomes
that.
A vicious cycle.
Yeah, that's right. So it's really interesting, I think, when we start to integrate what anger brings us and what her role is in why she's even there to begin with. So the fact that maybe you're feeling like a resourceless woman who's firing off in different places doesn't mean necessarily that it's as simple as you're not having enough time out. It's more about what part of you are you disowning that she's needing to be so bold in your world for you to pay attention to what she offers you. And anger is a perfect example of that. Anger, anger provides so much to us on a beneficial level.
Yeah, and yet we so rarely acknowledge that, I think.
Let's maybe do a quick benefits on anger. So, Bridget, when you think about anger, what are her benefits?
I think there's a couple of different, I think we can look at it a couple of different ways. I immediately go to the physiological benefits of anger. Sometimes anger can give you that massive adrenaline rush. If you're feeling really passive and a little bit lethargic, if you can get angry on something, your whole body can feel alive. It's almost like giving your body kind of like a pep up, and so it's beneficial on a physiological level because it can change the chemistry of your body and kind of take you out of that sleeping state.
Yeah, it reinvigorates you into your life again, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it gets you to stake your claim on what's important to you. And I think sometimes when we
affirm
are too
what
passive,
and what you don't.
there's drawbacks to being too passive, and I think sometimes anger can very quickly pull us out of that state and into, no, this is what I stand for, and that sense of solidly, grounding yourself in your values as well, because anger often arises really when our values are being challenged by somebody else, or we perceive that they're being challenged. So certainly the physiological benefits. The benefits to connecting to self, the benefits to enriching relationships. So sometimes if you're getting angry to defend a child or a partner or something, it can then breed connection with those people who you are seeking to. Or
create community if you're defending a right.
Yeah. It can help you to build a tribe. It can help you to feel part of something, as you say, like a community. I think there's heaps of benefits to anger.
Yeah.
And it can also show other people that you're no wallflower either, and that there's values that you uphold and things that you won't be crossed on.
On some level, it's a respecting of who you are,
isn't
it?
Yeah.
You're commanding respect, and that it gets you really clear on what's important to you and what isn't, what you value and what you don't, and gives you the manifestation of energy to stand up for the boundaries that previously, maybe even just an hour ago, you were willing to be walked over in.
I'd love to touch on why we think, why there's aspects of the feminine or women that feel that anger's not okay, or that we should apologise for our anger, particularly in relationship dynamics and also with our children. What's your view on that?
Probably need a bit more context than that. I feel a bit removed from it now.
Well, I guess, the idea that, we should always be, there's somehow some shame in displaying our anger.
Yeah, okay.
And... that as a trait or that as an emotion is less acceptable, say, than being happy, right?
I think the more you chase the light, the more the darkness chases you.
Yeah, I would agree, yeah.
So I think it's kind of, you're only seeing half the coin, right? I mean, we can all chase happy, 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 light, 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 but you are ultimately going to be breeding a nightmare if you're only chasing a fantasy.
Totally.
And by only thinking that the light aspects of you are socially acceptable or
admirable or, to be cultivated.
I think you're missing half of a woman, or half of any human, really, but let's just talk about it in the perspective of women and mothers, in that anger can be just the most motivating, deep, soulful call to stand up in your power, which we have been so acculturated out of in many ways. There's a whole feminist movement with it, but that itself breeds from anger about giving you the motivation to create the change that otherwise you would be passive in riding, right?
Yeah.
So I think, though, anger is still misplaced if we're creating something right and wrong, that anger in itself absolutely serves when you recognise that it's that warrior, woman or man coming out to defend what is theirs. And the bigger story is why. So why, if it's dysfunctional anger that's kind of firing out and being destructive in your life or in your relationships or in your world, that there needs to be a sense of equilibrium there. So what are the boundaries that are not being listened to in the day-to-day life that create it's not the cookie that broke that you're crying over, right? It's all of the stuff that you've been sucking down that led up to that moment that was it. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the last thing, the firecracker that let the volcano erupt.
It's part of a pattern. What's that pattern?
What is it actually there for? To wake you up to create enough pain to make you go, oh, what's going on here for me? And what is the smaller steps I need to make in my world? Because when we're able to actually do that, anger doesn't need to be dysfunctional. She can literally bring her in and kind of make her part of your whole. She becomes part of who your power is and who your motivation is, and, who you listen to as your, internal counsel.
As a guide.
Yeah.
She can be harnessed for, I don't want to say good, but that's intent. She can be harnessed intentionally to express, your next evolution sometimes.
And anger is a spectrum of emotion too. Like as soon as you're going to cut off one spectrum, you're cutting off the other, right? So anger's opposite over in ecstasy will equally be dimmed to the amount that you are willing to disown or dim anger or make her wrong. Ecstasy goes with her, right? They're two sides of the same coin. And I think we often don't realise this. And women I see largely living in this massive grey area, the middle keys of a piano rather than all 88 expressions. When we talked about this in the group, that the idea of this work is not that you become more passive, as we say,
or numb or anything
or
like
numb, that you numb to a situation. It's not that you feel less and that you get to this point where everything seems perfect. It's that you expand the feeling into feeling more. So you can feel the pain and the wound that's there, and you can empathize with that, but you can equally feel the joy and the gifts that came with it, and sit in such a place of immense feeling across all 88 piano keys that you kind of, soulfully feel the depth of that. And that is the point of this work.
And you're also really equipping yourself with the ability to ask yourself quality questions that you may otherwise not have had access to help you see that broader perspective. So still give you that access to those essential feelings that are our humanness. Across that huge spectrum.
And this is it, right? As soon as we start cutting off some feeling, her sister on the other side disappears. You lose the light when you lose or disown the dark, and you make her wrong. And we end up going, why are we so numb? Why are we seeking hits of emotion from firing out anger, or from extreme, risk-taking behaviour, or from drugs or coffee or alcohol as an outlet to actually just feel again?
And so it's really about, yes, we all love our happiness and our ecstasy and our inspiration. How can we equally love our anger, our fear, our darkness?
And that in doing that, you actually bring them with you. So if you're sitting in the middle going, life is just not the joyride that it used to be, or that I thought it was going to be, there'll be the disowning that's going on with that. And, it's just this whole idea of just making more emotion acceptable to our children, that they're not lovable when they're only beautiful. That they are lovable when they are in deep pain.
And the interesting thing is, becoming aware of your own shifting perceptions of your children depending on the shifting of their emotions. So if you find them less lovable when they are being complete rat bags or not listening or not cooperating or whatever it is that's a big trigger for you, then your capacity to love that in them is your capacity to love that in yourself, which reveals to you the work that there is to be done to integrate those things that we deem as our darkness. Because there's so much richness in those.
Yes, there is. And I know for you, Bridget, with your daughter that is soon to come into this world is like mine. I want her to know her boundaries. I want her to be able to walk out of a room or a situation that doesn't serve her with majesty and power, not because she wants to be the good girl and not make any ripples and please the people that are around her. I want her to listen to her soul. And she does that by calling on her darkness. She doesn't do that by just calling on her light.
No.
Like, come on. So why do I want to show my children the, depth of what anger looks like in me is not so it fires out at them and it's, this hideous, moment of wounding for them, because those moments that has happened is a big wake-up call to me about what am I missing in my day-to-day life. It's that I show them that this huge spectrum of feeling has rapture at either end, and that there are gifts. It doesn't matter where you go with it, and that there is a place for all of it. I don't want them to feel like this part's okay to show me or their greatest lover when they're older. It's only these parts that are acceptable. No, I want their whole soul here.
Yeah.
I don't want just fragments of it.
And so practically speaking, what do we say, or what do you feel is a example of a healthy expression of anger with your children?
Do you mean when I'm displaying anger? Yeah, okay. So I really do talk about it. So I actually really have started getting into body shaking therapy.
Oh, yeah.
It's like amazing.
You shake it out.
You shake it out.
Yeah.
And it's literally called shaking as a therapy.
Wow.
And the shaking groups that you can go to.
Kind of like laughing groups.
Kind of like laughing groups.
Right.
Yes. And so the idea is you're shaking and you're vibrating your whole body, and that is a way, one, to move emotion through it, but two, to actually reconnect with what's kind of happening underneath all of it. And I actually use it with my girls in the basketball team too.
Ah, cool.
So before a game, in halftime, and if any of them are having an emotional issue during the game, we have to shake. And I can't tell you the amazingness of that. Wow. The amazingness. And even the silliness of it, right? We have to face so much of ourselves just by being in the middle of a basketball court
and
shaking.
To shake. Yeah. And even that, bringing in laughter is really powerful for, shifting your emotional state.
So bringing it back to anger, if I'm thinking of I'm at home with my kids and I'm feeling really angry about something, I do start by saying, I'm feeling really angry right now. This is what is happening, and either I have the patience for that to move into that with them, or I just say to them, I need some time to sort myself out, and I go and do that. So I have my way back to balance, just like my son has his way back to balance, so on and so forth. So sometimes I'll literally just shake, so hang on a minute, I just got to kind of shake this out and get present, and I'll notice my son in particular will just stand there and he'll just watch me, but very still, present, watching, and I just kind of feel like he's just kind of testing the waters around, is this safe here, or should I be exiting this situation? I can see he's just kind of watching, going, which way is this going? And either I'm going to come out of that and go, okay, and I literally, you can't see me obviously because you're on a podcast, but I'm sitting here shaking my body. I literally sit there, and sometimes if something's really hard for me to have a conversation about, I'm literally moving as I'm talking. Okay, I hear that, but
I wish you could see this because this is really fun.
No, I feel a bit ridiculous doing it here, but it is that feeling of I'm big on moving emotion through our bodies. It doesn't need to feel trapped. So I think I said before, my son needs to move, run with a basketball, whatever. My daughter likes shaking, so she'll, move and jiggle her legs or her hands or whatever. Or we literally just take 5. So we have, 5 minutes out where we do something. Or it's, I really go, depending on, where that's channeled, is I just need 5 minutes on my own. And I'm taking myself away just to sit quietly. And sometimes anger can be moved just with breath work, journaling, being still and being quiet.
Well, and looking for the source of it.
Yeah, and thinking also, I constantly ask myself, what does my deeper self desire right now? What is it that I need? Do I actually need to reach out and ask for connection from my husband or a friend? Is that actually what's going on here, that I'm feeling isolated or alone? Am I, really fighting my value system between needing to run a household versus being present with my kids? Is that a clashing of values? And in which case, what's going to serve everybody here best?
Yeah.
And then it's how do I cathartically move anger myself? So, you know, we do a lot of, you know, laughter and physical movement. And I do yell. I am no perfect mama. So when I yell and I have really lost it, I always make sure I come back afterwards and go, you know, that was really not cool. I was really triggered and I'm really sorry. You know, really, I wish it was, you know, less for you to have witnessed in that. But at the same time, I just want you to know that that was my stuff, not your stuff. Or whatever the case may be. And they really get that. And honestly, for the most part, they're completely fine with it. And I think sometimes, even when we think we've fucked it up and anger's come out to bite us, that still serves them.
Yeah, and it's something to learn how to communicate, learn boundaries for themselves
and resilience, right? Because it's not like everyone in their lives is always going to love them to pieces.
Totally.
So when someone's hating on them, if they've never had experience in that before, how are they ever going to handle that on their own? So in these moments where I perceive that I've fucked it up, I also sit with, it's important for me to apologise and rebuild relationships there, make sure that is, you know, we call it owning it in my family. We've really got to own the choices that we made and the effect that had on the people around us. That's my one big thing. I don't care if you've made a mistake. I don't care if you fucked up in any way. But let's fucking own that shit.
Let's just not brush it under the carpet.
This is it, right? This is being big and bold in this world, and is owning your mistakes.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an enormously vulnerable place to go.
Hugely painful, right? And doesn't anger serve to get away from that vulnerability?
Yeah.
So it's also about learning what anger's here to teach us, because anger isn't always here for boundaries. Anger can be here for vulnerability. Yeah,
because it will pave the way. Yes. You know, it's an example, a great example of even yesterday with... Like my son's at a real biting stage where he'll do that for attention and to try and get a rise out of us. And he bit my husband so hard that my husband sort of picked him up and threw him onto the bed, how you just had to get him out of his space. Yeah. And like it was a bit shocking for my son, and so he burst into tears. And so I went over because my husband wasn't in the state to immediately comfort it. And I sat with him and I said, look, you know, that it wasn't okay for Daddy to do that to you, but I hear that you're really upset because that was a bit scary for you. But do you see why Daddy got angry with you? Do you see that you did something today that made him feel hurt? You know, and to start to get him already thinking about the consequences of his actions too, that nothing is ever, you know, in isolation, because yes, we don't always respond in the way that's most appropriate to children, but children also need to understand that when you hurt somebody else, that person also has to protect themselves. So it's such an interest, and then it was great because then my husband came in with the, you know, I'm sorry that I, you know, reacted the way that I did, but that actually really hurt me, and, you know, showed him what he'd done. And that's the way to kind of, or the way I see, one of the many ways to build something from a situation that could have otherwise been quite, you know, negative and conflict, like really stuck in conflict, as opposed to using it as a bridge to communicate what we are okay with and not okay with as a family.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've certainly found through, you know, my journey in parenting and through picking up aspects of attachment parenting and aware parenting, that there is some literature that seems to suggest, or in my interpretation, that, you know, you are to remain as kind of detached from the feelings that are coming up for you so that you can be present to the child. But I'm not sure I agree with that now, because I really think that what that encourages for us is repression of what is innately calling us to express. And to do that is almost a disservice to our children, because then they're not actually learning how to appropriately express the things that are not okay with them. You know, if they see that, because children are incredibly intuitive, if they see that you're repressing something that's clearly uncomfortable for you, do they then learn that later when a child does something to them that's really uncomfortable for them that they have to swallow it? You know, because I think that's that whole idea of, it's not just simply what we say, it's how we feel, it's how congruent we are in what we're doing.
And congruence is perfect, isn't it? Because kids so know when you are congruent with what you're feeling in your body and what is coming out of your mouth. They know if there's a disconnect there. Yeah. They feel it, and it will change the way that they respond to you. Yeah, I do think that's really interesting. I think often there is a bit of martyrdom in motherhood. Yes. That, you know, is so self-sacrificing to the point where it what is detrimental to the woman that is in that moment where she is asking herself to kind of split into two rather than being called into honour what is coming up for her at that point, recognising it's not what her child is doing, it's what's coming up for her.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And having a good role modelling to the child of how to move through that emotion, but that it is not about disconnecting or ignoring it because you're wrong based on what happened to you from your childhood, and that's what it's reminding you of. But that you go back and kind of re-equilibrate what's going on there for you.
Yeah, and
but not at the expense of not displaying that to your children, which is what you're saying. Yeah, I totally get that. I think if your body is really calling you into something, that there's a level at which you need to listen to that and actually speak out loud what is going on with that, and then create a space for it. And sometimes just naming it, just saying, right now I'm feeling really, which I really want to come back to. It tends to just even saying it out loud and letting that kind of internal voice have a voice rather than feeling unheard.
Or that you have to quell that because your child's needs are greater than your own in that moment, which they're going to pick up what you're consciously saying as well as what you're unconsciously not saying, and perhaps that's going to be more powerful, if that's a stronger thing for you. I think the importance of, I guess, knowing this and owning this within yourself is because the creating an honouring of your own boundaries means that you create a ritual almost in terms of doing that work on yourself, in terms of setting those limits with those around you and with yourself about what's okay and what's not okay, so that they then recognise that and then ask themselves, wow, what am I okay with and what am I not okay with, and why is that? Because as we always say, the exemplification is the best teacher.
Yeah, it is.
It's not the choice words that you might take from some idealistic approach to parenting your child. It's actually what you live and breathe.
And in fact, I often think this is the level of conflict to which you experience in your life. It almost seems to me the more you're repressing those urges and desires and boundaries within yourself and in your life, the greater that conflict happens around you. It's almost this, calling in of that ownership of what serves you and what doesn't, and standing truthfully in those boundaries for yourself. It kind of calls you into it.
Yeah, it really
which
does.
Is so interesting, isn't it? It's deeply painful to be going through that much conflict. But how does that conflict, in whatever form it comes in, right? It can be the mother-in-law, it can be the husband, it can be the community. It doesn't matter what form it comes in, but that conflict in your life is there to get you to step up to what is it asking you to own in your day-to-day life that you have not as yet put a greater enough emphasis on worthiness to own that boundary, which is really interesting.
And also, where you have unrealistic or idealistic expectations too of the way that families should behave or the way that relationships should work, because there's a hell of a lot of rubbish out there around, peaceful parenting and peaceful families, but to try and the more you chase that peace and that togetherness and that cooperation, the more you're going to breed the opposite, as you touched on before.
Yeah, that's right.
The whole the chaos within a family is its function. The dysfunction is the function. We're all kind of in various forms trying to get each other within the family to grow, and that growth doesn't come from happy exchanges that are polite and conscientious all the time. It comes from the ribbing. And so the more that we can embrace that part of our family and use those experiences to help each other grow, and relish them, almost like we're seeking to relish our darkness, the more richness there is for us to tap into in every moment.
Yeah, it's really true. So maybe it's worthwhile just in the last few minutes tapping on loving limits or boundaries for children, because I think often it's hard sometimes to think about putting in place a boundary for fear of
what's going to happen
when you do. I mean, I had a beautiful example of this in the bloody pool the other day.
It was epic.
It was like, oh my freaking God. I mean, as a most part, in terms of aware parenting, you and I have talked about so many times, this concept of putting in boundaries totally serves because you're almost looking to follow the emotion that comes afterwards.
And I actually love that sweet spot. Like, you know, when you have space for that.
Yes.
When you know you've got half an hour up your sleeve to hear whatever's going to come up when you set that limit, that boundary. You know, it can be so beautiful, but it's also really testing, right?
Yeah. Well, when you say it's so beautiful, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah. This concept of setting boundaries, setting loving limits, is this idea that children, it's like a broken cookie phenomenon. So they'll lose it over the broken cookie, or that they can't wear their pink socks, or that they can't have a certain thing to eat. And often those things will stack on top of each other. So you'll say no to one thing and then they'll go to the next thing. That's a real indication that it's never about the thing. It's about something deeper, and they're using that as a catalyst to express this full, you know, kind of letting this emotion rear its ugly head. Yeah. And so as a parent, recognizing that's what they're doing, and then setting a limit to say, I really hear that you want that, but we're not going to do that right now. And I'm going to listen to all the feelings that you've got around this, but, you know, we're still not going to go and do that. And sometimes, you know, that can just be explosive what comes up for them. You know, there'll be constant tears, and, you know, traditionally we're cultured to think of ways to quickly distract from the tears and stop it and give them whatever they need to do to just shut down that emotion, whether because we're not comfortable with it, you know, to hear it.
It's painful for us
to hear, or we simply don't have time to be with it. But when we do have time to be with it, when I say it's beautiful, it's amazing, because when they are able to fully express that and basically release it from their body, what often happens is that they soften, you know, their face relaxes, the tension's gone from their body. Where they were fighting you, they're now coming and sitting in your lap and letting their body flop and fold into yours, because they've actually they've seen that you've allowed them to express what was going on for them, and they're now willing to be held in it. It's really broken down, like, the barriers to connection, the barriers to full expression. And I actually have a lot of spaciousness for that. You know, I tend to find, I can find sometimes an hour of spaciousness to be with that stuff. I have other triggers, but that one is one that I just think is so rich in connection and helping my son shift uncomfortable feelings, you know. And that knowledge, I guess, of seeing that it's never about the thing. Sometimes it is, but often it's not about the thing. It's about what's underneath that, that they're really wanting to move and to shift and to move, you know, past.
Totally right. And holding space for the darkness allows greater connection. Yeah. But we can sit on the side of knowing what tirade is coming when we say no to that thing and be scared. And I mean, which is interesting anyway.
Yeah. And I mean, but it's an evolution, I think, in parenting too, and in yourself and your strength and confidence as a mother to be able to stand firm with those boundaries that you set, because depending on how you're feeling, it can be very easy to waver in your boundaries, and we all do it.
Yeah, of course.
Because that's human nature.
Yes, but the concept of boundaries for children teaches boundaries of self-respect or need for you, because sometimes those boundaries come into place when that thing or whatever it is they're asking for or doing no longer serves you, and you're willing to say, this no longer serves me. And that is a fantastic role model for your children, and at the same time allows them that opportunity to have big feelings heard that need to kind of crack open. They're kind of looking for the weak link on that wall to smash through. And I thought I had another point then, and now I can't think what it was. Anyway, let's go back to it. Loving limits. It's really brutal that it calls you into it, but the beauty of boundaries is not to see them as punishments or of ways of dampening or capping your child's greatness or ability. I think in a lot of unschooling communities, that's the way it can be perceived, that it's a domestication of children rather than a free-wielding spirit. But in essence, if we're never said no to, if we're never allowed walls to crash against, there's no place for those emotions. and they become destructive. They turn into risk-taking behaviour.
Absolutely.
Because they're looking for that outlet. And if it's not provided in a safe space, then it will find somewhere else, right? It's not going away.
There's a lot to be said for the fact that, it's important for children and all of us to learn, have tools to help ourselves self-regulate, because yes, it's great if we can hold a space for their emotions and in those moments do that for them, but there's always going to be social situations where we can't. Like, we can't as adults and they can't as children. And so by allowing them to have a set of tools that they can access for when they really can release these, equally it's also important for them to recognise what it feels like to be disappointed, what it feels like to not be able to have things that you immediately want, what it feels like to have to wait, all of those kinds of things. Because if those things are never taught early on, then it does manifest in later destructive behaviour or, lack of commitment to a job or, not showing up for things that you've signed up for, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. It really does. So I often think boundaries for children, whilst they can be difficult to sit on the side of, I think it's completely worthwhile for what they can offer in that moment for the developing adult, and also for the ability to actually have something to release emotion through, because they're not able to sit there and go, I'm feeling really, until they're older like this, and I really just need this so that you can help me do this. Like they don't have the language or the knowledge. Many adults don't have that. Of how to do that. So they're looking for the impetus, the thing that gives them just the right emotional resonance, I suppose, that feeling just kind of immerses from their body.
Yeah.
But if we can really hold the space for that, then that provides fantastic limits, and in doing so teaches them really, one, how to self-regulate, two, how to nourish and nurture their boundaries when they're older, and, three, that there's a big space for the spectrum of emotion and the connection that follows that. The connection that comes when you get to the vulnerability under the anger is profound and life-changing in relationships, rather than, treading along and pretending anger is going to save your soul, which is destructive in relationships.
Absolutely.
So is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a great summary of what we set out to talk about, which is really boundaries and the importance of knowing or feeling into what yours are, and upholding those not only for yourself but for your children to see too, so that they can own their own.
And it's the small stuff, it's the day-to-day, and it's about bringing a level of awareness to your own reactions and behaviours. And sometimes you're going to nail it, and sometimes you're going to go a little left, and sometimes you're going to go a little right, and it's like a surveyor, noticing the landscape. It's just kind of, wow, why did that happen for me?
Yeah, and wow, I really kind of let loose then. Like, what was all that about?
What was that about?
Yeah.
What were the benefits to me? What was I trying to get out of that? And how can I bring that in more consciously? And it's the small stuff. It's the day-to-day. It's the listening to the full spectrum of emotions. It's the reaching the connection or the vulnerability that's underneath what anger and ferocity is hiding. Yeah. And it's, role modelling that for our children so that they can develop their own incredibly healthy sense of self when they're moving through, immense teenagehood.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to connect with us is on nourishingthemother.com.au and on Facebook. If any of these podcasts are really resonating for you, please share them with your tribe. Please, if you get 5 seconds, rate the podcast on iTunes, because that really helps iTunes keep us up there for other mums to find.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to catch up with Jules,
it's at thepleasurenutritionist.com.
And for me, it's suburbansandcastles.com. And until next week, when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.